Welcome to Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Mendelevitz. Today we're talking about combating unconscious bias. So think about it. Who are the people who really in the workplace get the unconscious and conscious bias applied to them? It's usually the youngest workers and the oldest workers. The folks in the middle will get some of that, but what I have found is that it's really the ends that really make it different. This happened to myself. I found repeatedly as I got older that I was not taken seriously or assumptions were made about me. So what's kind of interesting is I would come to an interview and one of the questions inevitably that they would ask me is, can you handle the tech? Can you handle the tech? And it didn't have to be a tech job because I did a lot of program and project management, and they wanted to know if I could work within the tech. Well, the interesting thing is what I found repeatedly is I was usually the guy teaching it to other people of different ages. And it's important. But the other thing that I found is that there were assumptions made on the other end that the younger workers wouldn't get it, wouldn't talk, wouldn't be able to work with the older workers and stuff. And I found if you can find that common ground in order to talk, it's not happening. But we repeatedly have these age biases that come in. So as I said, in the workplace very often, and even in organizations, and you might even find it in some of your social situations, we tend to have biases about different age groups. And part of that, as we've talked about in previous casts, is that people make assumptions because of your age, because of the label. And we come up with these labels of these artificial groups of 15 years or so and say, you're in this group, you have these characteristics. And this kind of bias is not always conscious. So think about the difference between your conscious and your unconscious biases. So if you take the conscious, you probably know about that. Those are much more overt. People talk about them. They say things like, old guys can't do tech. Younger people don't have a work ethic. There's all these kind of things that are built in that swirl around us in social media and in society that become very overt and conscious biases. They're the ones that we know we have. But some of the most powerful ones are the unconscious ones. So if you look at what is unconscious bias? It's the ones you're not aware of. And because you're not aware of them and you don't have the life experience of a different person, you don't even realize that you're working off of these differences and biases. And as I mentioned, what are some of these most common ones, towards older and younger people? We think of different work ethics. We think of different tech levels. We think of how fast or slow somebody can learn. These are all in individual groups. And we'll get into some of this also in some of our subsequent podcasts. And we'll talk about how a person thinks about somebody older who works for them or somebody younger who works for them. But if you think about it, why is there a difficulty in understanding what your biases are? Because you don't know what they are. So it's very important to dig into that and say, okay, I know I think about this, I know I think about this, but we don't know that we're doing a lot of these things. So it becomes into, let's say, a hiring process. So I remember walking into an interview, and the person on the other side of the desk was much younger than me. And some of the questions they asked me were very much about my age rather than my experience. Now, I ended up not getting the job. And I wasn't surprised because what I found is that they weren't able to talk to me as a person. They were talking to my age. And I've been on the other side of that, where I have been trying to hire somebody and I'm talking to a younger person, and I had to stop myself because I was making assumptions. I was saying, well, they're going to be able to fit in here. They have a vastly different experience than the other people. And then what I did is I looked at it a different way. I go, there is no substitute for experience. However, how do you get that experience? You have to mentor. But when you mentor, you have to understand that it goes both ways. Have you ever been in a mentoring situation? Have you been the mentor? Have you been the mentee? How did you approach it? Think about, were you there to learn as well to teach? Because I will tell you that when I'm in a mentoring situation, whether one side or the other, if I don't come out of it learning something new, to me, it's not successful. And it's not going to be successful if you rely on those unconscious and conscious biases that you have. If I come to the table with too many assumptions, I am not going to be open to learning from the other person. And I think what it does is it pushes away the opportunity to work with somebody very different than myself or than yourself. And as I've talked before and will in the future, how do we get intergenerational teams to work with each other if we make too many assumptions about what the people with different ages and experience levels are going to be able to do? Sometimes it's as simple as just asking them. But if you are an experienced person and you're talking to somebody who has a lot less experience, think about the beginner's mind. Think about that time when you didn't know how to do it either. What did you do? How did you learn? It's important to understand that you also didn't know how to do this at one time. And now that it's become very rote for you and easier, it's important to understand that you don't have that opportunity to understand necessarily what it looks like from that beginner. You have this opportunity to teach, but if you let your biases get in the way, you're not going to be able to do that. As we all know, there is no substitute for experience, and I've said this before. But if we subject all our interactions to age-based biases, we are not going to be able to get past that. So think about it. You've probably seen other kind of biases in your life. They could be gender, they could be race, they could be socioeconomic status. And think about how you approach that. You have to think about ageism in the same way. Because the unique thing about ageism is we all age, and it all comes together with that. And I want you to think about, when you're having unconscious bias, can you catch yourself? Are you making an age-based assumption when you interact with people? Can you learn from that moment? You know, I've had this. I had somebody working for me who was much younger, and she was just learning experience, but she was bright and she was a good problem solver. And I made assumptions that she wasn't going to be able to do a certain piece of work. But then I sat down and said, how would you approach this? And I got incredible insight from her, because what happened is she started laying out a very different way to approach it than I would. And quite frankly, it was brilliant. And we solved a tough problem that we had been working on for a few months that we had not been able to solve. And what happened is I made an assumption that I was the one who was going to tell them how to do this. And when I became open to and moved aside those biases that I had the opportunity to succeed. I ended up promoting that person because she deserved it. And she took over a team and did some brilliant work. Really came around. And quite frankly, she was younger than the rest of her team, but it didn't matter because when I pushed aside the fact that the assumptions I made, the biases I had, I didn't even realize that I had some of them. And it came down to a conversation with her. And we found a common way to communicate. And as I said, she became one of my most brilliant team leads and really helped the projects that we were working on. So think about those conversations. Think about where they can help you head. And it's important that younger people assess the biases they have about older people, and older people assess the biases they have about younger people. Because as I've said in the past and will continue to say, intergenerational teams have been proven to be the strongest and most productive. But it really requires you to push aside the age bias that you have, whether conscious or unconscious. We all have different experiences. Whether you're in your 30s or you're in your 60s, you still carry important experience. And that will carry you forward. And we really need to better honor the different seasons of our life. Because if we can meld those and create an environment where everybody feels valued and everybody's ideas feel valued, and as we've said previously, learning how to communicate properly and the channels of communication, it's very important that we, by honoring those differences, as opposed to considering them as pitfalls, we actually succeed better. So think about what the fact that we see in the workplace, especially that the younger and older workers both face that age-based bias. Now, that doesn't say it doesn't happen in the middle. Really think about what your conscious and unconscious biases are. Are you willing to confront those? Are you willing to learn from them? While there's no substitute for experience on either end, that doesn't give you carte blanche to subject other people to age-based biases. Because what you're doing is you're really removing that energy and that help and that brilliance that other person has. So it's quite important for you at this juncture to really think about your unconscious and your conscious biases and how you are going to combat those. Let's pause. Let's pause, Barbara. Now we'll have a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll talk about some action items that you can use, and we will see you back shortly on Bridging of Ages. Welcome back to Bridge Builder Bits on Bridging of Ages. Today we talk about talent. We walk past the talent every day, and then we turn around and say, we can't find any talent. How are we excluding it? Because of conscious or unconscious bias. We are not looking at talent that is right in front of us. We walk right by it. Whether it could be because they're too young, they're too old, or don't meet that perfect purple squirrel that we're trying to look for. We walk past talent every day. Don't walk past the talent. It's right in front of you. This has been another Bridge Builder Bits on Bridging of Ages. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, welcome to Bridging of Ages. We're talking today about confronting your conscious and unconscious biases. And I just wanted to give you some action items that can help you to talk about and confront some of these biases that you may find are keeping you from working better with people of different ages and experience levels. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to actually confront your unconscious biases. Now, they're not always easy to find. That's why they're unconscious. We don't even realize we're doing them. It could come into how you were brought up. It could come into what you're used to working environment. It can come up with a lot of things. And it also comes from the fact that perhaps you're not thinking how it's affecting other people. We make comments all the time. We think all the time about what people of different ages have and what stereotypes there are. You know, just like we mentioned before, there's stereotypes out there that, you know, younger people don't have a work ethic and older people don't know how to handle any of the technology. And what you'll find repeatedly, yeah, there might be one or two people in there who do that, but we can't smear the entire group with that stuff because it prevents us from doing the real interactions. So what I'd like you to do is try to just write it down, type it into a note, whatever works for you in order to get it out there. Kind of do a brain dump. You want to do a brain dump of the biases that you think you're carrying and just look at them. Really just look at what they are and what assumptions you made and how they may be for preventing you from understanding people with different experience levels, different ages, and how you may be categorizing them in these artificial labels that we've put onto generations. The second action item, pause. Oh, sorry. And for action item 2, examine your age-based biases. Now you're really confronting, you've made that list from action item 1 of your especially unconscious biases that you've been able to uncover, but should also include your conscious ones. And now you have to examine them. So I want you to go through that list and examine why you think that way. Is it from your experience? Is it from your upbringing? Is it just a general societal thing that you've absorbed? And if you're able to examine them and look at each one individually, I think you will find why perhaps you've made that assumption all along. So take an example. You may have come across somebody who's older, who couldn't understand some of the technology that they were working with. It could be their iPhone, computer, whatever. And that may cause some frustration for you because you're looking at it going, why can't they understand this? Especially since this is a generation that probably invented most of this stuff. But is it good for you then to say everybody that age or in that age range can't handle it? As I said from my own experience, I've run into this a lot. The assumption is that, all right, the guy's got some gray hair. He can't possibly understand the tech we're working with on this project. And I said repeatedly, the funny thing about it is I almost always end up teaching other people, many of them at different age levels, some my same, some my own, some even a lot younger than myself. But I approach it as, okay, they just don't know how. Maybe somebody needs to explain it a different way. So if you examine those age biases, those age-based biases, I think what you will find is perhaps you're taking a couple incidences that you came across and spreading it across an entire group. Sure, we have different experiences and we grew up with different technologies, as my example. However, it doesn't mean we can't learn. I've seen people well into their 90s, using their iPhone just as well as people younger than them. So let's look at action item 3. Share your experience. So that goes into, now you've confronted your unconscious biases and your conscious biases. You've taken the time to, in action item 2, to examine your age-based biases, and you walk through those and have a better understanding of why you may be doing these things. And now it's time to share your experience. So how do you share your experience? It goes back to some other podcasts where we talked about how we talk to each other, finding that common communication. And like I said, in the example where you may find somebody doesn't know the tech well, were you able to teach them a different way from your own experience? And let's take it back the other way. I learn tons of stuff from people younger than myself all the time because the approach is different from the experience that they have. The life experience is different. As you get older, you gather more and more experience. And especially if you're open to learning from other people who have different experience levels, that allows you to learn at a much better rate and to learn more. And that's where sharing your experience really happens, because sharing goes both ways. I suspect you have a lot to offer. But I hope you think that I do too. And it goes back to what I've talked to before with active listening, where we're really listening to what the person has to say and not just waiting to put in our 2 cents. It's important to share that experience because we all grow better and together that way. And you will find it in the workplace, in the organizations you're part of, in the social, and even perhaps in your family situations, looking at it through another person's eyes. And that's what sharing experience is. So we're looking at our 3 action items here. We're confronting your unconscious biases. So you are really making a list of those and understanding how you react to them, and what they are. And as I said, if you really just start with a brain dump, just write it down. Don't edit it. That can come later. That can come in the second step, where you're going to actually edit it and examine your age-based biases. And you're going to look at them one by one and how they work together in order to prevent you from understanding what different age and experience levels are thinking and understanding. And then you can share your experience. You can share what you learned. And as long as you're open to it, you can learn from those who are also doing it a little different or have a different level of experience. That's how we learn. And we need to be open to those things because none of us have a monopoly on the truth. I've worked with some brilliant people. I've worked with some people who may have struggled. However, they all had something to contribute. And it's incumbent upon us, especially as leaders, to help them achieve that, to meld the group, to help everybody understand that different age levels and different experiences are actually a large asset, not a liability. So we come to the tip of the day. Problem solving is what is key. So if you look at the 3 action items, what do you come down to? You come down to somebody who's really a problem solver. And I have found when I'm in a hiring position, I always look for problem solvers. I look and ask them questions that probe to see how they solve problems because I figure they can get the rest of it later. We can train any of the stuff that we work on. But if they're not problem solvers and open to new ideas and for combining and assimilating those ideas together, then it's ultimately not going to work. And that's why I'm a big proponent of problem solving. I love problem solving myself, and that's been really my focus for a very long time. So I want to thank you for listening. Today's show is on combating unconscious bias. Our next show will be on what's called Walking Past the Talent Every Day, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And today's show has been combating unconscious bias. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to you joining us with our next show. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This has been Dan Mendelevitz of Bridging of Ages. Thank you. Today's show was talking about combating unconscious bias. We look forward to joining us in our next show next week. I ask you if you could please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This is Dan Mendelevitz, and this is Bridging of Ages.